What do Lehman Brothers, AIG, the Codman Square Neighborhood Health Center, and a portfolio of Ford Foundation Global Civil Society's grantees have in common? They are all hubs of densely connected networks. They have discovered that their success no longer depends on solely achieving their organizational goals. They are no longer focused on solely managing people and programs. Their organizational boundaries are no longer rigid and impenetrable. They and we are all experiencing a fundamental shift in our sector, from issue-based nonprofit organizations and program-focused foundations as the vehicles and language of our times, to networks as the way to achieve social impact in the 21st century. This shift is in fact becoming a movement that is happening in response to our systemic problems, a movement that is truly global. In country after country, people are coming together in new ways, making their voices heard and taking collective action. Paul Hawkins, in his new book, Blessed Unrest, attempts to document how the largest humanitarian movement in the history of the world is coming into being. A movement of movements that is unified by ideas, not ideologies, whose activities go unreported by the media, and whose impact has yet to be fully realized. Recently, I was working with one of my favorite Ford program officers, helping to design a meeting of her global civil society grantees. The purpose of the meeting was to share the findings of a recently completed evaluation of her 8 years of grant making. Grant making in the field of strengthening the networks and movements through which people exercise citizenship around the world. What was so interesting was to go back through those 8 years to the year 2000 and to remember the frame through which she and her colleagues were looking. It was shortly after the Battle of Seattle, the original free market protest, when there was a growing awareness that something might even be called global civil society was beginning to emerge. This evaluation was looking at the outcomes, the overarching strategies of connecting, nurturing, and building the capacity of this barely emerging field that guided her grant making. What was so very inspiring to me were the meta-outcomes that were being articulated. Over these 8 years, the 8 years that some in our country may be calling among the darkest, this movement of movement, this blessed unrest was being woven together across the world. Among the meta-outcomes identified by the evaluation, these 3 stand out. Global civil society has become a more recognized, if still heavily contested, discourse in world politics. Global networks of civil society organizations have widened and deepened. Civil society organizations have obtained greater capacity to promote a democratization of global affairs. Another, more locally based example that illuminates this cross-boundary network approach is a story about the Davis Foundation in Springfield, Mass. For 3 decades, the foundation had given hundreds of grants to cultural, educational, and human service organizations in support of Springfield's families. However, data from one of the poorest cities in Massachusetts showed little promise for many of its most at-risk residents. In view of this situation, Executive Director Mary Wallachy and the Davis Foundation's trustees asked the question, what else might we do to improve the well-being of children in Springfield? And they began to explore other options. The Davis Foundation engaged us at IISC to help it step into a new role, convening the local community to devise strategies and build momentum in support of its youngest children. IISC partnered with the foundation and community members to co-design and facilitate a community-wide collaborative planning process called Cherish Every Child that gathered input from hundreds of stakeholders, including nonprofit and business leaders, elected officials, public school personnel, and local residents. The year-long planning process yielded a shared community vision and a blueprint for action. 5 years into implementation, with a densely woven network of activists working together, Cherish Every Child continues to be noted for a number of successes. In the words of Mary Wallachy, while the final product of the early work was the development of a comprehensive blueprint for our children, the process of achieving this plan was as important as the product itself. I believe that is because what we are learning in the connected age is that it is not simply the blueprints, the tactics, and the strategies that produce change and impact. It is the network of relationships that share a vision and a set of beliefs. In each of these examples, you can see the critical role played by the foundation. In each instance, the foundation understood the difference between a funder-driven initiative and the opportunity to step into its positive power, to convene a diverse set of stakeholders, to create the conditions, nourish the network, and build real partnerships with its grantees. And you can see the capacity of the nonprofit organizations to transcend their organizational self-interest in order to collaborate, connect, and take concerted action, to achieve together what is absolutely impossible to achieve separately. Recently at IISC, we were introduced to a very useful framework developed by David Snowden. It's called the Cynefin framework, that further explicates the need for collaboration among multiple stakeholders and a network approach. Cynefin is a Welsh word that refers to the multiplicity of factors in our environment we simply cannot know. Many organizational issues are complicated. They can be broken down into their component parts and can be solved by experts or technical fixes. On the other hand, many organizational issues, such as strategy and policy, are more complex and need to be tackled by many heads and many hands. However, all of the social issues with which we engage in our sector, from climate change, HIV/AIDS, and global poverty, to education, public health, and social service, reside squarely in the complexity box, where there is a great distance between cause and effect. Some of you may be familiar with a well-read essay written by Ron Heifetz for the Stanford Socialization Review, titled Leading Boldly. In it, he describes these complex issues as adaptive problems that are not well defined, the answers are not known in advance, and many different stakeholders are involved, each with their own perspective. Adaptive problems, he says, requires innovation and learning among the interested parties, and even when a solution is discovered, no single entity has the authority to impose it on others. The stakeholders themselves must create and put the solutions into effect. The idea of designing processes that appropriately involve stakeholders in collaborative efforts to both identify problems and create solutions is not new. In fact, it has been the backbone of IISC's work in the world for many years. What is new are the tools that are available to us. As Clay Shirky writes in Here Comes Everybody, The Power of Organizing Without Organizations, most of the barriers to group action have collapsed. And without those barriers, we are free to explore new ways of gathering together and getting things done. To paraphrase him further, we can do old things in new ways and new things we've never even thought of before. As the 20th century free market and public systems disintegrate, as funding for our services go down while the demand for them simultaneously goes up, the social sector has no choice but to respond with 21st century thinking and tools. It is up to each and every one of us to leave behind our outdated approaches. It is now imperative that we break out of our issue, program, and geographic silos to connect with others and ensure cross-boundary innovation. And you know what? We need to invest. We need to invest in R&D and prototype new approaches. We need to really understand how to apply network theory to social change. We need to develop more collaborative tools and large group methods and more Web 2.0 platforms to make complex adaptive systems work. We need to experiment with new organizational structures that are flat, networked, and moving power to the edges. Finally, we need to see. We need to see that we are all a part of the unnamed movement described by Paul Hawken, a movement that is not burdened with the syndrome of trying to save the world because it is trying to remake the world. We need to see again, in his words, that we will prevail, not defeat or conquer, but rather the thinking that informs the movement's vision to create a just society conducive to life on earth, it will rain.